Hi, everyone. Welcome to Homespun, where creativity and community come together. I am your host, Misty Doan, and today I am joined by Elizabeth Chappell of Quilters Candy. Elizabeth is an incredible entrepreneur, the host of the Craft to Career podcast, and a fabric designer with Art Gallery Fabrics. She is here today to remind us all to take risks, ask for opportunities, and to embrace who you are because the world needs more of it. All right, Elizabeth, I am so excited to be here with you today. I got to be on your podcast a while back, and now I'm so glad you were kind enough to join me here. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I always say, I think we're friends at heart. We just never get to actually spend time together. Someday it will happen.
Yes, it'll happen.
It will for sure. We'll manage our crazy schedules and make it work eventually. So, well, I would love if we could start by you just telling everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do now, and then we'll dive into the backstory.
Yeah. So currently I am a fabric designer for Art Gallery Fabrics and a pattern writer. And, it's so funny when people ask, what do you do? I'm like, oh no, which one of the things do I love? So
Yes.
I have a podcast. And then I teach a signature course once a year where I teach other quilters who want to write patterns how to do that.
I love it so much. And you are fully immersed in the quilting world now. Were you always quilty or crafty, like growing up?
No. Okay. Crafty, I would say yes.
Okay.
But quilty, no, which is funny because my mom is an award quilter. I mean, award winning. She passed away, but, amazing quilter. And I grew up where she would hand quilt and she'd have the big, I don't even know what they're called, but the quilt was up with a frame and she would, be hand quilting it. And I'd go to the fabric store with her and I was like, no, not again, So it wasn't until I got older that I realized, oh, I actually want to do this,
And what was that spark that drew you back to it?
Yeah. So, well, I had a neighbor friend. We were best friends. She moved away now, but she lived across the street and we would go on walks every day. And I'm an entrepreneur and I was like, Tracy, we should start a business together. What should we do? We had all these ideas. And her mom, I live in Houston. She came out for this market. And I was like, what is this market that your mom goes to? Can I tag along? And it was Quilt Market. And she is Bonnie of Bonnie and Camille. That's her mom.
Oh my gosh, how fun.
Yeah. And so I just was blown away. It was very hip and modern and cool. Like, no offense to what my mom did, but our styles are very different. And so I was like, oh, there's a place for me in this community. I was into like fashion blogging and stuff. And at Quilt Market, there was shoemaking and clothing and, home decor, all the different things. I was like, oh, whoa. And the fabric spoke to me. It just ignited.
Oh, I love that. How fun. And so then your entrepreneurial spirit and you've discovered the world of quilting again. You kind of dove in a unique way. So can you talk about the start of Quilters Candy?
Pros and cons, right? I started quilting because I saw a business opportunity. And I was like, oh, there's this niche market. And it spoke to me. Obviously, Quilt Market was very cool. I was like, oh, I like this. But I came to it with a business mindset. From the very get-go, I've looked at it very, very differently from most quilters who start as a hobby and are like, maybe I'll turn this into a career. So my friend and I were like, well, let's start a business in this niche. What should we do? And we started a monthly subscription box for quilters because that was very hot at the time and an untapped market. But the more every month that we would put a pattern every month in the box, and the more that I would curate and look for patterns that I liked, I got really excited. I was like, oh, I want to make that. No. And then my mind was like, I have ideas of my own. I'd like to write these. How on earth does one go about doing that? And so, it's just kind of morphed over the years.
Amazing. And now, I mean, it really has grown. And I think you continue to inspire so many people through your business. And whatever brought you to it initially, I think it's very apparent that you were called to it, and you are definitely passionate about what you do. And it's obvious to all of us who watch you and all that you put out into the world. So thank you for making that leap. It's pretty incredible to watch. And so now, you, like you said earlier, you host a podcast, and I was lucky enough to be a guest on there. Which I have to admit, I'm a little nervous interviewing you because you're an old pro. You're so good at it. So you are.
That's hilarious.
No,
the
you are.
Tables have turned. I feel like I'm with the old pro here. So.
Oh, well, that's very kind, but truly, you are an incredible host. And so, if you guys have not listened to the Craft to Career podcast, I highly recommend it because Elizabeth does a great job, and she has so many incredible guests that you've gotten to talk to. And so I wondered if there's maybe a guest that was like, I cannot believe I get to talk to this person.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, recently, and this is probably, I don't know, because it's recent. I mean, it's now, I've been doing it for years, which is crazy to think about. But I had Susie Quilts on the podcast. She was one of my very first guests, and I've known her since I first started quilting, and that was just so fun to hear her story. Yeah. Recently, I had Minky Kim, and that has turned out to be one of my favorite. It was a very vulnerable conversation that we both had, and a very I really love that. Joe Hudson, he's not a quilter at all, but we talk a lot about all sorts of things, and he talks about just our mindset and things that are very, very interesting that when you think about, I mean, life, business, anything, our relationships, he touches on all those things. So that was a very oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm having him on the podcast.
That's awesome. It's really cool. And I really like the variety that you bring to the table because it, like you said, it's not always a quilter that you've invited to join you. And I think it gives a really well-rounded view and learning opportunity for all of us who are in this industry to just, expand our horizons a little bit. So that's super cool. Really amazing.
I have one more, by the way. I have to add one more.
Okay.
Yeah. So Trey Stewart, he is a basketball player, college basketball player, Division I, and he takes quilts and turns them into clothing for professional athletes. And I was so intimidated to have him on the podcast. And for once, my kids were like, my mom is the coolest. She has a quilting podcast.
That's amazing. Isn't that the best when finally you're like, they get it. I know you shared something that you made something for your daughter the other day, and she was so excited. And I can so relate to that because most of the time the kids, at least so far, my older two work in the shops here and they appreciate quilting, but it's definitely not their love. And so even when I'm working on things, they really just don't care. But when you find the thing that they love, it's like, man, it just makes your mom heart soar,
Yes, it does. Well, I have to say too, in my audience, I'll hear people say my kids aren't interested at all. And I'm like, I was negatively interested in quilting for years. Don't give up hope. It wasn't until my mid to early 30s that I was like, oh my gosh. And now I'm fully, so never say never.
Oh, exactly. And I can totally relate to that. I grew up surrounded by quilters. I was very fortunate in that way that I had women around me who were just incredible at so many crafts, truly. I never had the idea that I couldn't do anything because all of the women in my life were just rock stars. And so I feel very, very privileged from that example. But my first foray into quilting was with my grandma when she was getting sick. And I loved her. I loved spending time with her. But quilting was never something that was like, I wanted to do it. I wanted to help her when she was struggling with it towards the end of her life. And because it was a thing that I did with her and then she passed, it took a long time for me to have any interest in coming back to that. It was like this sacred time of my life that I really felt was like it had served its purpose in that way. And so even, after Jake and I were married and I had, a couple of my kiddos, then we started the company. I was hesitant. I was willing to help behind the scenes with business things and other opportunities that were there, but the actual quilting, design, sewing part, I was like, nah, I don't think that's for me. And it wasn't until my youngest went to school that I was like, all right, I'll make him a quilt for nap time. I can do that, you know? And then once I was in it, I was like fully back in it because, you know, like I said, I think I have that background that it was just like so much possibility. And now,
Mm-hmm.
man, I can't imagine doing anything else. It's
I know,
crazy
right?
how life works out that way. You're like, if you would have told me in high school that I would be a quilter and be designing quilt patterns, I would have laughed.
I know. I mean, I took a sewing class in high school and I was like, this is for the birds. Like, I can't, you
Exactly. I'm like, if I never have to make another pair of pajama pants, that would be okay. It's so true.
know.
Well, so through your podcast, you obviously share a lot of business advice and, you know, just life advice in general. But I think one of your greatest gifts that I follow is just your passion for encouraging other creators on the business side. And so can you talk a little bit about that and how you kind of found your love and passion for sharing?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting question and one that I wonder myself a little bit. But I
Mm,
think, yeah, wow, there's a lot to talk on there. I just feel like it's a predominantly female industry, and there are men here, and we love and are so grateful for, you know, everyone who
absolutely.
votes. But predominantly female and predominant, and there's nothing wrong. There are people who love to quilt for a hobby or, you know, for fun. Everyone, whatever you do, welcome, welcome.
Yeah.
However, there are women who want to earn a career, who want to be able to have flexibility, creativity, stay at home, whatever. But I just find so many women who are like, no, not for me. And that's why I think Joe Hudson, that one guest, was so exciting for me because there's so much psychology going on behind each one of us. Our doubts, it's the human condition, you know, it's just part of this human journey. And a lot of people find healing in quilting, therapeutic. So there's a beautiful thing in helping people tap into, and it's a struggle of my own, like learning to love myself, lean into trusting myself, taking risks, knowing you can do this, and then seeing the results like, oh my gosh, this is cooler than I ever thought it would be, whether it's a quilt or your business or whatever. It's very, very rewarding. But for me, I'm not satisfied so much with the results for myself, and everyone has their own calling, you know, whatever it might be. But for me, I really want to reach out and help others experience that as well, and just like tap into their potential, which is a
Yeah.
fine line to walk, because I feel like sometimes I really maybe invest a little too much or care too much, and I'm like, how do I separate
Yeah.
it? So anyhow, but that's part of the journey as well. So I hope that
Well,
answered your question.
it does. And so let's talk a little bit about that because I think for me, I am also a people person and I tend to be a bit of an empath and so I can let feelings and opinions really weigh on me. Have you experienced that struggle in your own life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are days where I'm like, what have I done? Like I've raised my hand and put myself in the arena and I don't need to, you know? This
Mm-hmm.
is totally optional, but I've done
Yeah.
the thing. So yeah, I'm an empath and I do feel, but there is a drawer of letters that I save and emails that I save and students whose lives have been impacted, and that is worth more than anything, you know. And recently, I've had some loved ones who've passed away, or people close to me, in the quilting community. Some big people have passed away recently, and
Yes.
it does bring about this like, what is it all for? What is it all about? What are we doing here? At the end of the day, um, the human relations that we have, building ourselves personally, conquering, growing, that, and you know, family, all the things, those are the things that last and stick. So even though it's uncomfortable at times, it's worth it, I feel like.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. And honestly, like that was probably the most difficult part for me in putting myself out there is that I know I often put too much weight in other people's opinions. I love that phrase that, like, what other people think of you is none of your business. I have to remind myself that
Hmm.
all the time. But it's a good reminder that, like, for the majority of us, we don't feel 100% confident. We're doing the best that we can, but we feel called to do a thing, and we're not going to ignore that calling. And I just think that's so important. Do you have
Yeah.
like specific advice? Maybe I love that you keep a drawer of all the goodness. That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool. Is there
Well,
any?
yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, is there anything else that has helped you kind of um, mitigate what can be the muddy waters of social media?
I'm really blessed to have a husband partner who's very supportive. That's been crucial for me. No matter who it is, having someone in your corner that is really, and he will just laugh at things like that's crazy. And it's really good to have that balance and perspective of like, oh my gosh, you're right. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Therapy, big advocate of therapy, life coach, whatever that might be. And embracing the journey. Like it's a journey and learning. I've gone from like more of a stance of, oh, that's ridiculous, doesn't matter, to love and empathy for people who show up in a way that I'm like, well, that's okay. We don't
Yeah.
have to agree and I can love them and love myself and not need to change myself. But it's taken a lot of work through, the things I've mentioned. So
Absolutely. No, I agree completely. So you also teach this incredible course, like you said, once a year. So maybe tell people a little bit about that, especially if they are interested in building a creative business.
So yeah, it's the quilt pattern writing course. And when I first started writing patterns, I remember someone close to me saying like, "That's a big deal. You don't just do that." And it kind of lit a fire under me, which is a theme in my life. I was like, "Oh, I will do this," but it was hard. And I looked and Googled and how to write patterns. There were a few blog posts, but very surfacey.
Mm.
And it was through other courses and lots of trial and error. I was like, why don't I help people do that? And I also found in the quilting community, oh, I have to say, your mother-in-law was one of the awesome examples. There's contrast, people who would hold things close and not want to tell you because it felt like scarcity. And if I help you, then it's going to hurt me. But
Yes.
your mother-in-law didn't know me from anyone, and I saw her at Quilt Market and asked her, why do you give so freely, on YouTube and all the things? And she was just very generous and very giving. And she took time to speak to me, which was no one. And she stood out to me as someone I was like, I want to be like that. I want to be someone who shares and there's room enough for everybody.
Yeah. I,
So anyhow,
I,
back to the course. Oh, what were you going to
yeah.
say?
Oh, I was just going to say, we've definitely found that in our business. The more generous that we can be, it always comes back
Mhm.
tenfold. And so I agree. I think early on there was such a scarcity mindset, but really there's abundance of success if we all just encourage one another and lift each other up. But
Yeah.
continue on. So
Yeah, no, it's true. And it feels better. It just feels
it
better
does.
when you're in that scarcity. It feels yucky and stressful and you're always watching for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
But when you're like, oh, and you can sit back and calm down, it's so much more fun. And to
It's so
cheer
much
other
more
people on.
fun to cheer them on and to see their successes and to feel like you have this amazing camaraderie and community that is really all in it together. And like you
Yeah.
said, there is genuinely room for everyone, whatever you bring to the table, and the uniqueness I think is what makes the quilting community so special. And it's my favorite part.
Well, you touched on this awesome thing, the uniqueness. So each one of us, we have our own brain and creative spirit, and whatever we create, it's going to be uniquely ours. And what I really do not even touch on, it's a huge part of the course, is like
Mm,
bring your creative voice to the table. And so people
yeah,
are like, but there's so many pattern designers, which is a whole nother topic. But I'm like, but there's no you out there.
exactly.
And if we tap into what we love and really, which is scary, to put yourself out there and be different. But if you can do that, that's where the magic comes. So
It really is. And as I dove into designing my own quilt patterns, it was hard for me initially to trust my gut. You get a little bit of that, well, who am I? Who am I to do this? What makes me an expert? Because I certainly have never felt like one. But it's exactly that. It's that I had something on my heart that I wanted to share, this idea in my brain that I wanted to see, brought to life, and
mhm.
being willing to take those things that come to you and share them with the world. My hope is always that it will either help them if their journey is simply to make quilts because they love it and it's healing and it's their favorite hobby, awesome. But if it also can encourage someone to kind of take that leap into being brave and putting themselves out there, man, I would love to see more of that. So is there anything else you want to touch on the course? I know we kind of got all over the place there.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess like the meat of the course I touch on, no, I keep saying touch on, but I really teach on is Adobe. So it's Adobe
Mm,
Illustrator and Adobe InDesign. And I guess you could speak to this. This is a unique opportunity because anyone you can write a pattern using any program, right? And I
hmm.
even offer a free course that for anyone if you want to learn how to use Canva. It's a free
Sure.
resource. But at a certain point in your pattern writing career, if you want to write for Missouri Star or whoever,
Mm,
there is an industry standard, and we use Adobe products. And when you pass
yes.
files around to an editor or whoever, it's through Adobe. And so, and even just creative freedoms. If you're like, man, I'm really struggling to make a cathedral window or whatever it might be, and the graphics are really limiting. Adobe is it's everything.
Yeah.
But it can feel very overwhelming. And so I really just narrow it down to here's what you need to know to write a quilt pattern. You don't need to know every single thing in Adobe. There's so much, but
Right.
here's what you can do. And I break it down into really tangible, step by step, bite by bite lessons to help them have success with that.
I love that. Yeah, that would have been hugely beneficial to me early on. I mean, now luckily the company has grown enough. We have an amazing team that helps support, and so I get to do all of the fun creative side, and then
Awesome.
other people get to bring their magic and do the actual pattern writing, and I feel incredibly blessed because of that. I mean,
Mhm.
it's incredible. So I do want to give a shout out to our amazing pattern team and our tech editing team, and yeah, and I think that's another piece where it's like maybe the design part isn't your magic, but if you're good at writing patterns, there's still an opportunity for you in the industry. If you're good at editing, still an
Mhm.
opportunity for you in the industry. So don't be afraid to kind of think outside the box either, if
Yes.
this is something that you feel called to do.
Well, yeah, and on that, I find a lot of people who take my course, they aren't interested in marketing. And I'm like, oh,
Mm,
there is a place for you. Like,
mm,
you do not need to, if you're an amazing writer or a tech editor or whatever, there are so many people who need that and will
absolutely.
hire that out, and you don't need to go out and be on Instagram making videos if that's not your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. Well, so next up, let's talk about your fabric collections because they
Yeah.
are so beautiful. And
Thank
that had
you.
to have been just a dream come true. So
Oh,
let's talk
yes.
about that journey a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I wish I'd kept a journal, but the timeline of it all is a bit fuzzy. But when I started designing quilt patterns around the same time, I was like, how cool would it be to have my own fabrics that I could put in these patterns? And the more you quilt, you'll know this too. The more you quilt, you start to realize what fabrics you use and the kind of color combinations and the scale of the prints and all of that. And so, yeah, I really wanted to do that. And it took years. I mean, it was same with writing patterns. My first were terrible. I did these designs and I remember crying, like looking at the fabrics that I bought and looking at my sketches. And there was this huge gap of like, how on earth are they looking that good? So
Mm,
it took a lot of years to learn how to use Adobe products to really get the look that I wanted. But anyhow, so that was a dream of mine. And yeah, started designing for art gallery a couple of years ago and have 3 collections with them now.
yeah, that's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about that process? When you finally felt like you maybe had a collection that was ready for the world, how did you take that next step to reach out to, a design house, or how did that
Yeah.
go?
Well, so my path, everyone's actually, when I talk to people, everyone has a very unique path. So,
Agreed.
you think
Yeah,
like, what is the path? Everyone is
there isn't
different.
one. That's why
Yeah,
I feel like the more
exactly.
people share, the better.
Yeah. So I had a relationship with Art Gallery from the very beginning. We, in fact, Pat Bravo, the owner, she was like the guest for one of our monthly subscription boxes back in the day. She's from
Oh,
Argentina, and we included like a treat from Argentina and her fabric, and kind of had
that's
a
awesome.
Argentine, yeah, box. So we had that friendship and connection. Um, I invited myself out to AGF. I asked, couldn't I be a socialite, like a brand ambassador? And they were like, yes, we'd love to have you. And I invited myself out to Florida. And I'd been working at this point on my designs, but I knew they weren't good enough. And Pat asked, are you ever interested in designing fabric? And I showed her my designs, and she for whatever reason, she was able to speak in a way that finally resonated. She was like, Elizabeth, you have a look on Instagram. Your quilt patterns have a look, but your fabric doesn't have that look. Like it's kind
Mm.
of, I mean, I don't know how she said it, but it just wasn't coherent and it didn't fit my brand. And when she worded it in that way, I was like, what? Yeah, okay, I do have a look. And so I was able to tweak that. And I also told her, I don't know that I want to have a signature, like standout design. And for her to tell me, you can design whatever you want, don't be confined in these boxes. I have ended up having like a signature, design, but for her to tell me you don't have to, all of a sudden I was like, oh, the shackles are gone. I can create.
Right.
And that opened up a lot of creative freedom.
That's amazing.
And
Well,
then,
and sometimes that like permission to really be yourself is what you need to just like soar, right?
yep.
Exactly like you said, just take those shackles off and really figure out what you want to create. How amazing. That's really cool. And also, I want to go back to, I'm so impressed that you were just like, "Hey, I want to be a socialite. Pick me." I love that so much. Like,
That turns out is something that's not common. I didn't know, but I think that's attributed a lot to my growth and success is that I'm just like, I'm just going to try it. Let's just do
yeah,
this. So
I love it so much. I mean, and what a great reminder to just put yourself out there, because what's the worst that's going to happen, right? No, you already think it's going to be no, maybe in your head.
yeah.
So,
And you're in the same
uh,
exact spot that you were before. And I think
uh,
we think, oh, then they're going to think less of me. Trust me, as someone who reaches out and asks me stuff, I'm not remembering like that person asked me this and I said no. They
yeah,
were all too busy to. So just have
exactly.
fun, you know?
Exactly. Everybody's doing the best they can. And I think if you also hold on to that mindset that like everybody wants success for everyone around them, and a no doesn't mean you're the worst, I don't like you, I don't want you to be successful. That's not the same thing. And so finding a way to separate those is so
Mm-hmm.
important. Yeah.
Well,
Cause
it's funny because people will hear this and think, oh, Elizabeth asks and it happens. I wish I could give you a list of all the things I've asked and have been told no. So you've
exactly.
got to go out there and try it.
Yeah, I love that. Got to shoot your shot.
Yep. Yep.
Definitely. Oh, that's so amazing. Well, is there anything else that you would want to share with maybe up and coming quilters or entrepreneurs? Because that's obviously a love of yours, to just
Yeah.
help them make the next big leap.
Really, I don't know, self-love, like really just
Mm.
learning to tap into what you love. Go on play dates with yourself,
Yeah.
go out and explore and just find something totally outside of the box that you'd want to create and do and just try something different. And that's to either entrepreneur or anyone,
Yeah.
just play and have fun and laugh and that will show up in what you do and create.
I love that. So, is there something that you do to kind of keep your creative bucket filled?
What's interesting is I'm saying no to a lot more things, like
Mm.
keeping my time free. For me, I don't know how that, but most creatives I talk to are the same way. Having things on the calendar all the time is a real time. It's a suck for me, my energy. So
No, I agree completely, and it's definitely a hard lesson that I had to learn as well, because initially you want to do all the things. You want those
yep,
opportunities and you feel like if you say no that you're going to miss out somehow. And I've certainly found in my life the more protective I am of my time, the better my creative work becomes. And
yep,
I want to do good work, you
yeah,
know?
exactly.
And yeah, and so I love that, and I can completely echo that sentiment that I've had to get a lot better at saying no. I was such a people pleaser that was impossible for me to do,
Yep,
and now it's really not. I'm actually much better at just being like that's not going to work, and if I can offer an alternative, I'm happy to do that. Um, but yeah, that's a big one. I love that you brought that up. It's huge.
yep,
So,
yes.
well, I just truly appreciate you spending this time with me today. And I know you have a busy schedule ahead of you, but I would love if you would just remind everybody where they can follow along with what you're up to, or if they want to check out any of your courses or your podcasts, where they can find out about that.
Yeah. So the podcast is Craft to Career, if the business side interests you. Instagram, I'm having such a fun time creating content for Instagram. It's at quilters_candy. And then, yeah, if you're interested in pattern writing, the quilt pattern writing course opens every September. So I'd love to have people join that if that's what they're interested in.
Awesome. And is that on your website that they would find that?
Yep, that's on the quilterscandy.com. Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate it. And hopefully
Thank
we'll be
you.
hanging out together in person soon.
We will. I know we will.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.